The November 12th, 2025 special called meeting of the Gwinnett County Board of Education is now called to order. The purpose of this meeting is to provide an update on the superintendent search. Before beginning, I would like to share a remark from Ms. Stone as she is en route. Ms. Stone has reviewed the presentation in advance and provided feedback ahead of the meeting, which was incorporated into the materials shared tonight by the Alma Advisory Group. She is coming directly from work and will be arriving just a bit late. She's checking to see whether she can log in remotely, though she understands she may not be able to get access, but she's listening via live stream, and she wanted to express that she's doing the best she can to balance her professional commitments while remaining fully engaged in the work of the board. This community meeting, and in particular, the superintendent search update provided by the Alma team, which reflects feedback gathered from the community, the forums, and the survey, is a priority to her. So I wanted to share her statement. We look forward to seeing you soon, Ms. Stone. At this time, I would like to call and I do want to acknowledge that Mr. Knudsen was not able to be here this evening as well. At this time, I would like to call Ms. Monica Rosen to the podium, Chief Executive Officer of the Alma Advisory Group. Ms. Rosen?
Good evening. It is an honor to present our findings in the community engagement process completed earlier this school year. As you know, the Alma team has served as a partner and advisor for the district for a number of years, so it is a distinct honor to support the board at this important juncture. I appreciate the board's thoughtfulness at working to understand the most pressing priorities of your constituents. We honor the time that so many people took to share their perspectives by lifting up what we learned so that your process can be grounded in the voices of the community as you move forward with your process. Our presentation will cover a brief review of our timeline, followed by a summary of the engagement that took place and the key insights we learned. We will share a brief synopsis of the job posting, which will be the board's next task after today. This slide describes the roadmap for our search. We have completed the community engagement phase of our process and are now moving into the development and advertisement of the job posting. We expect to present candidates to the board by January in hopes that the board can reach a finalist stage by end of March and announce your selected candidate by early April. I want to begin here by acknowledging the tremendous efforts of your team to support the success of community engagement, beginning with the support and sponsorship of Dr. Taylor, who's here with us this evening, who ensured that all staff could prioritize and support the process, to Melissa Laramie and the communications and engagement teams, who facilitated all communications and outreach and the planning for the community gatherings. For the IT function, and in particular, Michael Lewis and his efforts, and the Chief IT Officer, Eric Spoto, and their efforts in supporting smooth use of technology throughout our work. For Kathy Harden and the HR team for their partnership in planning and communicating with employees, and for safety and security, for the principals and their staff who hosted us at each of the school meetings. The entire district came together to support this effort, and we really wanted to thank them. I will take a moment now to share how we approached community engagement. We began with individual discussions with each board member to understand their priorities and what they wanted to be sure that the Alma team accomplished. We made a decision that to ensure full representation, that each board member would host their own community gathering in their district, and Alma would host one virtual meeting for anyone who was unable to attend one of the board-hosted in-person events. Each meeting was well attended, especially compared to board-hosted events outside of this process. We also opened up opportunities for interviews and focus groups, holding meetings by role in the community to allow participants to focus in on their unique perspectives as employees, business leaders, community members, and others. We opened up the opportunity to meet with community organizations, and many took us up on that offer. And finally, we hosted a staff and community survey with thousands of individuals participating. In addition to this, I will also add that we had many informal conversations throughout our engagement. Follow-up emails and communications from concerned citizens, individual conversations who offered their viewpoints in more private and individualized settings. All of those points of view are included here. In all, we held 63 meetings and spoke with over 730 individuals to understand their lived experiences, their ideas, and their solutions for the future direction of the district, and their priorities for the superintendent of GCPS. I'm going to take a moment to share the data related to who participated in your community survey. I want to pause here as well to explain why asking respondents about their background is so helpful to the board, as this was a question that came up in the search in our conversations and seemed to affect how people responded to the survey. Each of the demographic questions were provided, reviewed, and approved by the full board. Different board members added certain demographic questions to the survey. Survey demographics are important for a simple reason. It allows the board to check for whether all aspects of the community's point of view is reflected in the input that will drive their decisions. As part of this, demographics allow us to analyze data and understand if any parts of your community might feel differently about the district's strengths and opportunities. This is not a perfect process, but it does provide important data that the board can use as it sets its priorities for the search, and that the incoming superintendent can use as they plan for their transition into the permanent role. This slide before you shares the breakdown of survey respondents by role. Our survey included responses from every facet of the community, the largest group being GCPS parents and caregivers, but also including a significant number of principals, teachers, every central office division, and GCPS students and graduates. It is important to note here that while we had 3,000 respondents to the survey, not all respondents answered all the questions. So we are including in our analysis those that did respond to key questions of the survey. We were pleased to see every cluster represented in the survey, including your special entity schools. When we analyzed race and ethnicity, we generally saw that the survey demographics were closer to your county numbers than your student demographics, which tends to be common for Alma in our community surveys. I'm also told that this breakdown is similar to what the district has experienced in its own past surveys. I will say, though, that 24% of your respondents chose not to answer this question, and that trend continued through most of our demographics questions. So unfortunately, we don't have the full picture, but we did complete our analysis by stakeholder group and use the information that was provided by respondents. For those who did respond, we see an overrepresentation of white and multiracial families, and an underrepresentation of Hispanic and Asian families, with Black respondents slightly underrepresented as well. So in this survey, in this slide, you see the dark blue bar represents the respondents to the survey. The white bar here represents the makeup of the student population in Gwinnett County Public Schools, and the light blue bar represents census data from Gwinnett County. Our faith-religious question did not specify religion, though we understand that there is much religious diversity in the Gwinnett community. Your survey includes representation of each of these groups, with women, religious community, and veterans generally overrepresented compared to county data, and LGBTQIA+ representation slightly underrepresented compared to the county. In terms of income, again, respondents did not all answer this question, but for those who did, lower income households were relatively underrepresented, and higher income respondents were more heavily represented compared to GCPS household income numbers. We also took a look at where participants in the survey resided. We asked for individuals' zip codes. The survey participation covered the majority of Gwinnett County, as you can see here in this heat map, with some participation in nearby surrounding areas as well. So what have we learned? We wanted to start by sharing a little bit of context because we heard a lot of your constituents grappling with the shifting demographics of Gwinnett County. We wanted to understand this better, so we're sharing here the graphic story about the growth and change in Gwinnett County. As you can see, the county has experienced dramatic growth from 1970 to today, growing from a rural community to a large suburban one. It's interesting to highlight that 20% of your growth, roughly, has occurred in the last 10 years alone. In the same token, your diversity has expanded dramatically as well, especially in the last 20 years. No community is a monolith. However, it's important to note that Gwinnett County, in many ways, is distinct in that the community that attended our meetings and completed our survey largely represented the many diverse points of view that are existing in the national sphere today. And many of your community members grappled with those points of tension as they shared their perspective on leadership and on the direction of the district. Your community is grappling with multiple truths happening at the same time, and I want to share what some of these key issues were. It was unique to us that the Gwinnett County Public Schools community grappled with these multiple truths at the same time. Some individuals debated each other. Some individuals debated each other in our discussions. Other times, the same individual might call out two different ideas that seem in tension with each other. I want to start by saying there is great pride all around in GCPS's long-standing strengths. People move to Gwinnett for its public schools. People are proud graduates and parents of graduates. Individuals described a district that has always been high-performing on a national scale. And yet, community members share a desire for real change, a feeling that the district has groups of students it may not be serving as well, and a need to dig deeper and continue to improve. There is a shared goal of achievement for all. Nearly every group we met with brought up specific groups of students with lots of attention on multilingual learners, talented and gifted learners, your Black students, and your special needs students, including as well your low-income communities and other groups. And yet, many of our participants either avoided altogether or talked openly about the concern with the use of the word equity in Gwinnett County. Many spoke to us of wanting to go back to the Gwinnett way. For some, this meant returning to a time where everyone was proud of the district. To others, this suggested a time of higher performance, different policies and practices in place. But people held this truth along with a hope for fresh eyes and new innovation, some even calling out that innovation is in fact the Gwinnett way. And finally, we saw tremendous loyalty to the district among staff, among parents, among leaders, and yet we had many people share with us privately that they were uncomfortable openly critiquing the district. We had quite a few members of the community who requested private conversations so that they could share their point of view with us. This has key implications for your next leader. They will need to contend with differing perspectives in the community that many acknowledge. It will be important to celebrate GCPS's strengths while moving collaboratively to chart the path forward for the district. Understanding these points of tension in the community will be an important thing for your leader to navigate. On this slide are listed the responses to the survey question related to student success and academics. What you see on this list is from top to bottom the highest ranked items that individuals believe GCPS does well today. In the area of student success in academics, there was a lot of agreement in your top strengths. And there were some groups that had slightly differing points of view. Improving academic outcomes, fostering a learning environment where students thrive, and supporting the needs of talented and gifted students rose to the top 3 as a strength overall. But fostering a supportive and inclusive environment emerged as a top 3 for Black and white respondents, as well as those earning below $25,000 a year. Support for early childhood programming was seen as a strength when we looked at the data by your LGBTQIA+ community. And support for multilingual learners was a strength for low and middle income respondents, as well as Hispanic respondents. Meeting the needs of students with disabilities was considered a top strength for your veterans, as well as your parents of special education students. So we wanted to point out where there were slight differences in the way that different groups responded to this question. We also asked in the area of district operations what individuals saw as strengths for the district. And when it came to district operations, your community was much more aligned on strengths, with safe and secure schools, strong operations and facilities, and recruiting, developing, and retaining staff seen as a shining strength. Special education parents, Black survey respondents, and your students also called out transparent communication as a strength. And community members called out measuring improvement against standards as a real strength. This slide is now looking at the top areas of improvement, and we had a more nuanced view here. First, many of your strengths also emerged as opportunities. But interestingly, some groups called out other areas as key improvement needs. Fostering an inclusive environment was a top 4 overall. It was a top 3 for your LGBTQIA+ community. I will add that in our focus groups, members of the LGBTQIA+ community and parents in particular described variation in inclusion on a per school basis, and a concern about ensuring that Title IX support roles are fully staffed in the district. Black respondents, GCPS staff, and community called out achievement gaps specifically as a concern. Parents of gifted students want better support for talented and gifted students. And parents of special education students see a need for better support for students with disabilities. Here again, we saw both a strength and an opportunity, with many perceiving the support for special needs students as a highlight and strength, while many parents shared painful stories with us of difficulty advocating for their children and getting the right supports in place so that their children could succeed. When it came to operations, we saw much more complete alignment here. All groups of participants highlighted recruitment, safe and secure schools, and transparent communication as top areas of focus. If some of those sound familiar, it's because they're also deemed strengths in many areas. Again, our top areas of strength can also be perceived as our top areas of growth, and that was apparent with this question. But here we saw no difference across the different groups of individuals who responded to the survey. I want to take a moment and lift up student voice in this process. Our student perspectives were so illuminating for us, and while they reinforced much of what we heard in other groups, we wanted to call out a few key intricacies here. Students love the many ways they can be involved in their school and community. They love the diversity of programming offered, and a sense of improved safety. That's something your students called out. They also love their teachers, and they talked a lot about that with us. When we asked what they saw as the most important areas for improvement, they posed questions about whether their schools were really giving them the real-world skills they would need after high school. They want more mental health support. They want to see better engagement around AI. And they spoke openly about wanting more equitable funding between schools and the feeling that some schools have more and better resources than others. I want to highlight the quote from one of the students who said, "Each school is funded the same. but other schools get donations from parents so they can get IB courses. This was mirrored in each of our district meetings in some way. More affluent communities describe their perception that other communities do not seem to have the same resources that they have. And lower income districts mentioned visiting schools outside of their community and feeling blown away by the diversity of courses and programming and even the facilities that other students are experiencing. Ultimately, there were key challenges felt across multiple stakeholder groups. And I want to talk through some of these challenges that were mentioned to us. There is a sense that there is disproportionate access to resources across schools and communities. There is a sense that the frequent change in leadership has caused confusion around priorities and direction over time. There is a sense that student outcomes should be studied and addressed transparently with a keen focus on literacy, math, and post-secondary readiness, and a nuanced look at the specific parts of the student communities, including income status, race, and programming like gifted and talented and multilingual learners. We heard a real concern for retention and morale, mentions of burnout, lack of support, and a sense that GCPS might be losing its competitive edge in pay that it once had over its neighboring districts. As I mentioned earlier, shifting demographics are creating new opportunities and demands for teaching and are very top of mind for many of your constituents, as well as a need to rebuild trust. At the bottom of this slide, I want to share two key ideas that felt more divided in the community input that we wanted to lift up for you today. There was a clear debate around the approach to the superintendent search itself. Some were adamant that the search should remain internal, including a push to appoint the interim superintendent, while others feel strongly that a national search is needed. To this, I would offer the clarification that our planned search is open and inclusive, both to internal and external candidates, and our hope is that you as a board can lead a search focused on the key competencies required for the role, where your top choice candidates have the opportunity to demonstrate those skill sets to you. And finally, there was a theme in our conversations around the role of the board. Parents, staff, and community members reflected a desire for the board to promote a level of trust and credibility with their governance role, while we also heard a great deal of value for the key moves that this current leadership, this current board has made, and a desire to see greater support for the full sitting board today. I'll now switch gears and review your next important step, which is to develop the job posting. The job posting will include 5 key elements. We will talk about the district and the role itself. The hope is to be clear on the shared values that you want the leader to bring, and also to explain what a tremendous opportunity this is for prospective candidates. We will also cover the key responsibilities. These are the day-to-day tasks that will drive the superintendent's work, priorities, and accountabilities. We will describe the skills needed to be successful. These are core competencies. These are knowledge, skill, abilities, values that candidates need to demonstrate in order to be evaluated and qualified for the role. You will also establish minimum qualifications. These could be background and experiences that individuals should bring. These may include state-mandated licensure, but can also include specifics related to work experience, proven scale of leadership, budget authority, and other things. You can include here preferred background and not have it be minimum, but these are things the board will need to consider next. And finally, you will summarize a range of salary and the benefits that are provided with the role. Normally, the benefits are standard language used by the district. So in a moment, I'll turn it over to you for feedback and questions. I want to name that our next steps are to build and approve the job posting, for Alma to begin actively recruiting candidates for the role, and for the board to interview and select its candidate. I also want to say and point out how all of this important information drives the work that you do from here. We expect the insights that we gain tonight to drive your decision-making about how you build the job posting itself, about how you design the interview questions that you will follow when you're interviewing candidates, and the decisions you have still to make around whether this is, what the steps of the process, the screening process will be altogether. So I want to share for the community's benefit the understanding that we wanted this to be public today because we want the entire community to hear what you're hearing that we learned. And we want the community to know that we remain open to their insights, their feedback, and that we will continue to keep the website up and available and up to date. And on the website is an email address that your constituents can use. If they feel we missed something tonight, we want to hear it, and we will continue to utilize those insights as we move forward. Thank you so much. I will now turn it back to you for any feedback and questions.
Thank you, Ms. Rosen. I would now like to open the floor for board comments and questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman Dr. Simmons, and thank you, Ms. Rosen, for the presentation. I want to just say I've been briefed on this presentation, and when we had our conversation and the briefing, I was very impressed with the data that is used to drive this decision. So we're not just looking at qualitative data, so the actual numbers from the surveys and how it's broken down by clusters, but one of the things I really appreciated was the quantitative data as well. Going back to the qualitative data, I had an opportunity to attend the District 1 community meeting, and one of the things I really appreciated that Alma did at the meeting was they provided an overview of the job of a superintendent. It was a very short presentation informing the community what is this role, and I was able to operate as a fly on the wall. Folks were split into different classrooms and just pretty much having a dialogue of what's going well in GCPS, what they would like to see, and some opportunities for growth. And so I just really appreciate the Alma team for not only providing the opportunity for stakeholders and community members to engage in this process, but then also sending out surveys. And Chairwoman Simmons, is this also where we provide comments as well? So, all of my questions have been answered regarding, I was very curious around the survey results, in which you have so thoroughly provided. As far as the feedback, I'll speak to my experience as a former GCPS teacher just 2 years ago, and one of the things that I appreciate, I taught at Tequila High School, which is a District 1 school, and my experience in GCPS has been around this idea of transformational leadership and having the support of my administration, my colleagues, in doing what's best for students. And however, in this role as a board member, 11 months in, I'm hearing from staff and bus drivers that there is a certain culture of where some staff members, all the way from bus drivers to teachers, they have a fear of speaking up. And so I hope that our next leader will promote a culture where stakeholders from bus drivers, paraprofessionals, teachers, staff feel empowered to speak up. And I also hope that we can foster this culture of trust and transparency, which has been a theme in this presentation today. And I would also like to, along those same lines, address this governance team with trust and credibility, and just communicate to the public that this governance team, which by the way can change every 2 years due to election cycles, but this governance team, I feel that we are the most equipped to do this process. We have 3 former educators on the board. We have business professionals on the board. So, and last but not least, one of the things that I would like to see is a leader who, and I had some data prepared here I pulled from our August 2025 board meeting around our milestone data. And recently, the RBES I was briefed on a couple of weeks ago, and really want a leader who can help fill and address those gaps. If you haven't if you didn't attend the August board meeting, please go back and watch it. I have some concerns around our ELA, our literacy, as well as our numeracy scores, which from 3rd through 8th grade are ranging in the 39 to 47% of students meeting proficiency or demonstrating mastery on those. And then particularly in District 1, again, learned from this past August, that our 3rd through 5th graders are hovering around 50%, a range of 20 to 70% of our students demonstrating proficiency on our milestones. And so really hope that we have a leader who can address some of those literacy and numeracy gaps. Also for our students with disabilities and our multilingual learners, we also learned in that meeting and over the past couple of months that they are meeting proficiency and distinguished at 20%. So only 20% of our students with disabilities and multilingual learners are meeting proficiency and or distinguished. And then also we have seen, and the data supports, again, go back and watch our August board meetings as well as our September. Our Black students are disproportionately represented in students who receive disciplinary consequences, whether that's in school, out of school suspension, tribunals, which also means that they're more likely to be permanently expelled or expelled from schools. I would also like to see more representation of our Black and brown students in advanced placement courses. But I will say there is a lot of great things that I see in GCPS, like in our Archer cluster, to have an opportunity to take advantage of sustainability of the STEAM programs. There are literal chickens on campus, and the students have named them. I know at Levin Elementary, one of the students named, I think they have about 8 chickens. One of the students named it KFC, and I think about KFC often, and hope KFC as well. And the students also learn like composting and the dual language immersion programs, not just in the Grayson cluster. We often talk about the French immersion program, but in the Decula cluster and Archer cluster, there's a Spanish immersion program that our students have an opportunity to take advantage of. So there are a lot of great programs that I'm excited to continue, and I hope those programs will continue as well. And then lastly, I just thank everyone who came to this meeting and those who might be viewing online. And I look forward to moving forward, engaging in this process.
Thank you, Board Member Stone.
Thank you, Ms. Rosen, for the presentation. This amount of data is fantastic, and it really reinforces why we're doing this, and it brings me back to an event I was invited to this morning. I was invited to speak at a community meeting and engage folks down in the south part of District 3, and a community member raised his hand and asked, why are y'all taking 6, 7, 8 months to pick a new superintendent when you can go out to the private sector can select a CEO in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks? And I like the question because from my perspective, I've been in the corporate world for nearly 20 years, and I can relate to that question because I've interviewed senior level executives and I know how that feels. But I had to put my board member hat on because at the same time I'm standing in front of the community as an elected official accountable to everyone sitting in that room. And had to remind them and myself that I am standing here with probably one of the two biggest responsibilities that we hold as board members, one being to enact good policy, and two, to be responsible for the employment of the superintendent. And so that was, and he looked at me, and I can hear nods and applause in the rest of the room to understand how that conversation played out. And so you presenting this data kind of supported what I had said to that constituent, that this reinforces exactly what we wanted to do, wanted to accomplish, and what we did very well. And from the community engagement sessions from all 5 board members to the survey and all the responses that we got to, and I think I heard you said that the email address, GCPS soup search at gcpsk12.org is still active, still available. Yeah. If community members still have feedback, if we missed anything, they can still email you. Again, it doesn't come to the board, it doesn't go to the interim superintendent, it goes straight to you all to provide continuous feedback to continue to shape this process and ultimately the job description, which is really what I'm truly interested in from my perspective, from a business guy, and of course hearing from the community as well. So this is one that we want to engage our community. We want to hear from them. We want them to be a whole part of this process. You've proved that through multiple listening sessions in multiple languages, in multiple touch points, from in-person to virtual to electronic to phone to all of that. So thank you for doing that, and it's something that we wanted to accomplish. I too support what Ms. Stone said when looking for our next leader, that top of priority for me is always going to be student achievement in where we need to be. We've had some good data recently, but as with any organization, there is always room for improvement. Especially with our graduation rates, especially with our test scores, our MLL population is extremely important. Your data showed that our MLL population has grown significantly over the last 10 years in Gwinnett County. Very quite evident, as well as our students with disabilities, talking with parents, talking with teachers that are in the same classroom with our special ed students, and the support that they need. We need to give these teachers support. So this is all things that our next leader needs to be tasked with. And for me, another thing important is true facility and staff support, making sure we have the best and prettiest, and for lack of better words, facilities to entice community members to move to Gwinnett County, to entice businesses to come to Gwinnett County, because at the end of the day, I still believe that a great school system is one of the main pillars of a solid community. So these are just things that are extremely important to me, and creating a solid job posting is going to attract candidates that are going to fulfill our needs to find that next leader to lead us through this next phase. So I am encouraged by the data. I'm encouraged by the community's engagement in this process. And to everyone here tonight, thank you for coming out. And for those listening online, thank you for listening. For those that haven't quite engaged yet, please engage if you feel like you need to, if you feel like you want to, if there's something on your mind, because again, empower us with that knowledge so we can make the right decision, because we need to. I understand where the community's from. The last 5 years have been rough waters with, it's no secret, 2 superintendents in the last 4.5 years. So we need to stabilize our seas, our waters here, and we're going to do that. That's our goal. So that's really all I have. Thank you, Ms. Rosen, for what you're doing, and I am optimistic and look forward to the next steps in the process of finalizing this job description, getting qualified candidates in front of us to start meeting them virtually and in person to establish and settle on a candidate. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Gasper.
Thank you, Ms. Rosen, for this exceptional presentation and for all the work you have done in the community. I do have a few questions related to some slides, so I'd like for you to, if you could, don't mind, if you can share a couple of slides. Yeah. Slide number 6 is the first slide I have some questions on. Actually, slides number 5 and 6. So my comments related to these two slides are really addressing how you have engaged community members. And I must say, one of the things that was quite attractive to us in this process is community engagement. As Mr. Gasper said, and Ms. Rachel Ruffin-Stone said, this is one of the most important things that we can do as a school board member is select a superintendent. I've been here before, and I have some lessons learned, and I am very intentional about making sure that we are following this process in a way that is engaging of community members, and also making sure that we're continuously having a transparent process, continuously communicating with one another, but also making sure that we're doing the due diligence that is necessary to ensure that we select the right superintendent. And so when we hear from community members, this is something we did not do in the same way that we did the first time. And this is a lesson learned, and I totally appreciate our board and our chair, Dr. Simmons, really leading this process around ensuring that we have the engagement from the community in this way that is so intentional. So thank you, Dr. Simmons, for this, and board members, because this is really, y'all, an intentional way to make sure that we are listening. And the data that you presented, I do believe that it is representative of historical information that we've seen before. And some of it is concerning in a way that it's not representative of the Gwinnett County demographics. It's not representative of the school system. And we've seen this before in many of our surveys. And so I guess my question to you is, when we look at the data and the feedback from constituents, knowing when you look at slides number 5, 6, number 11, and 12, knowing this information, how do you reconcile as a search firm, knowing that we have this information that's not fully representative of the community, however, you want to make sure that we're representative of their voices. How do you reconcile that in your search process in providing us with candidates that can represent the needs of the community?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Johnson-Morgan. That is a very excellent question, and it's part of the reason why we had so many different opportunities for people to engage. It was important for us to go out to communities, not to keep asking them to come to us. And so for us, it was really about who was able to come to the in-person events, how we got the word out through community organizations to help advocate, but also the community groups that were willing to come and sit down with us and talk about their points of view, what their constituents had to say. The virtual community meeting was very well attended, and it demonstrated to us some people were not as comfortable or it wasn't convenient or possible for them to get there in person. So what we try to do is to try to have as many opportunities for people to interact with us. And then, as Board Member Gasper, Board Member Stone mentioned, still keeping that door open so people can continue to share their perspectives with us. One of the things that was heartening for us was when the survey feedback from different groups, even if they were relatively underrepresented in the survey, when that perspective matched what we heard from individuals one-on-one and in person and in our focus groups. That felt very validating, that even though the participation might have been on the lower side, that the points of view were showing up consistently between the open-ended comments and the things that different people throughout all of our conversations brought up to us. So we really appreciated that. We felt that the survey really affirmed a lot of the individual examples that were shared with us in our conversations. So no process can be perfect, you know. I think we know that the size of Gwinnett County Public Schools is a lot bigger than the number of those who participated in this process, but we saw very clear themes that were consistent, and the numbers were representative enough that we feel this is good information to drive your process moving forward. And we continue to be open to feedback as it comes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, in terms of the top qualifications,
Yes.
based on the profile of the candidate, I don't actually. I'm kind of looking for the slide. I don't see it.
We have in here the criteria. The makeup of the job posting, the categories in the job posting itself. But the draft, we're working now on a drafted job posting, so that will be coming to the board after today.
Okay. Because I recall, maybe it's in the appendix or something, but there was a slide that was related to some highlights around the feedback you got from the community members around sort of like the top areas of focus. So I look forward to hearing more about what that looks like in the job posting there. And then the final question I have is, if we look at the community feedback from the students on slide number 21 and 22, again, this is work as a reminder that we always center the needs of our children. It's a part of our core values and beliefs, and this slide I believe is very important. I've also heard when I engaged in some of the sessions that the students did notice some differences. And so I do want to call out that some of the strengths and values, and also the insights and areas of improvement. Can you just generally share a bit more about the student voice in this process, and how you will be uplifting the student voice in your process as you provide superintendent's recommendations for us?
Yes. So first of all, one of the great joys of our work is when we get to sit down with students, and the students in Gwinnett County Public Schools did not disappoint. Your students are brilliant. They have amazing ideas. Just listen to the students. They know what they need. They're very thoughtful about what the real opportunities for them. Most of the students we spoke with were older students, so they were, majority were high schoolers. But what we did was, almost every district, I'm fairly certain there was at least one we couldn't have a meeting, but when we were hosting a community gathering at a school, we requested if the principal could gather a group of students from the school to sit down with us while we were there. We also did have student advisory council. I might be using the wrong term of that group, but we had a student advisory council that also sat down with us, and there were a number of other student groups that came together with us throughout this process. So their perspectives are here. Students were invited to participate in the survey as well, and a fair number of your graduates also participated in the survey. There are lots of ways that student voice helps inform this process. They have a different perspective because they are sitting in the seats in the classrooms every day. So where your parents can say, we love the teachers, it's really something when you have a student who says, you know, all of the teachers that I've had, compassionate with students, they seek out good behavior and they reward it. That's really meaningful. So we feel that their perspectives are important for you to center in your work, in particular as you're thinking about the interview process for your candidates. So I think there are opportunities to include their perspectives in the job posting, to think about the examples they provided in the interview questions, and to be centering your decision at the finalist stage as well on the things that you heard from your students.
Okay, and thank you for that answer. So I just have a follow-up question, and this is my final question related to understanding the dynamics and the nuances in Gwinnett County, and also Gwinnett County Public Schools and the culture we have. And the question I have for you is if you can share with us some of the challenges that you've encountered and limitations, and also if you can share what opportunities we have going forward when considering those challenges. We need to ensure that we have the best candidate pool possible to make sure that we have a good superintendent. And I know that it hasn't been easy, and I'm curious to know, and anyone who knows who I am and how I am, I have to ask you this. I have to ask you, how have you navigated this process as a firm to date? You've met with many different constituents, from Republicans to MAGAs to Democrats, right? The political spectrum, as well as the economic spectrum, as well as the linguistic spectrum, and the cultural spectrum, and the religious spectrum. The diversity of Gwinnett County. Can you share with us some of the challenges you've encountered, and how will you ensure that you can, as a search firm, continue to work courageously and bravely throughout this process to make sure we have a good candidate pool?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. There are a few things that I would say in terms of what we encountered. I first just want to say Gwinnett County Public Schools has always been known as a high-performing district. Operationally, you all are like the best we've experienced. I know you asked me for challenges. I will be sure to do that. But I just want to start with how operationally strong the district is and how it came out in the survey and everything. It was no surprise to us. But it's actually one of the hardest things, because to pull all of those events together is actually a huge lift for your staff, and it's not their main job to run a superintendent search process, so the way people showed up was hugely helpful to us. And what I'll say is that I think it's very unique that Gwinnett County really does resemble what we hear around the country. I think that there are some cities, some districts where we've led searches where there's there's always a diversity of perspectives, but we've had districts where it might be a more left-leaning community, or it might be more progressive in nature, or more of these different kind of focuses. Gwinnett County is representing everything, as you mentioned. Republican, Democrat voices for sure, but also the different things that are being debated on the national landscape are being debated here. What we think it means for your candidate is that it has to be someone who can navigate those different viewpoints. And what we heard from your community is a desire to have somebody who can really unify the community behind a shared vision. And I think that's going to be a challenge for the superintendent, and the thing that we've got to look for. Have they had experience where they have to work with differing perspectives that may be competing with each other in some ways? As I mentioned earlier, there is a real debate here that teachers have, that district leaders have, that frankly board members struggle with. How do we talk about meeting the needs of all students and recognizing that certain terms are currently considered divisive right now, like diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And we just felt that it's not as straightforward in this particular environment. So as a board, you want to be unified up front. What are we looking for? How do we describe that task so that we can find a leader who's ready to meet the challenge of the community here? I think there's a lot of support for this search, a lot of attention. The fact that 40 to 50 members, it might sound small, but that's a lot of people coming out after a long day's work to come and talk to you about your superintendent search when there's not like an immediate impact on a family who the superintendent is. I think a lot of people care that the board get this right, and it puts pressure on all of us to deliver on what they're looking for. And I'm glad you're doing a national search. I'm glad you're doing a comprehensive process, because people need to see, exactly as Board Member Gasper said, just the seriousness with which you're treating this task. And hopefully you'll be able to share with them, you know, how the things that came up tonight then play out in the way you carry out your interviews later on down the line. So I feel there's a greater charge and accountability for us to make sure we're really honoring what we heard, because people are really paying attention and they want to make sure the board gets this right.
Thank you. I just prepared a brief statement that I'd like to share related to me as one board member. And I know that this decision ultimately lies on our board, listening to community voices, engaging our search firm in this process. But ultimately, this decision is going to be a decision that the board will have to make. And this is a very difficult decision and a very critical decision, as it is rooted in meeting the needs of all children. I want to say that equity is cannot be treated, right, like a slogan or a buzzword, but really equity is larger than just the word. Equity is really a demonstration of courage and character, especially nowadays when we have this term as being deemed as a term that isn't that's a negative term, or people have disinformation and misinformation around the words. I don't want a superintendent that has fear around a word, because to me that demonstrates a greater concern around lack of courage to unapologetically address the gaps and the needs for our children. And so, again, this is my personal perspective as one board member, but I do believe that when we address the needs of each and every child, that we ensure belonging, and every child deserves to be able to feel like they are supported and positioned for academic success. So I also want to highlight that the work of the Alma Advisory Group has been exceptional around this process, around listening to the voices of our students, our teachers, our families. Your intentionality and professionalism has been exceptional. You all met with 60 groups, 730 people. You collected more than 3,000 survey responses. Families were the largest group of respondents. I heard that in your notes. And then the overall results were aligned with the historic trends of our school district. So I also want to comment on the demographic section. And there was about 25% of the respondents who said that they don't identify as anything. And I do want to comment that there was an intentional effort of community members, political group, maybe MAGAs, I guess, who decided to not respond and had a community campaign against responding to the survey. And that survey, I guess, as you can see, it reflected that in the data that 25% of the people did not identify. But we move forward and we move on. It didn't hurt anything. But the campaign to try to skew the results of this survey unfortunately does not benefit our school system, nor does it benefit meeting the needs of our children. And so I do want to express the need to have a superintendent who's not engaging in this political environment where we have things like this and engaging in it even privately, publicly, in the school district or outside. So I do think that that's important, that we recognize the data and that it was skewed because of politics, and how important it is for us to also recognize that we need a superintendent that can navigate the nuances of the politics, but not be the politics, right? We also heard from multiple faith communities. I would be remiss to say that when we look at the data and when we look at the faith percentage of the people who completed the survey, it doesn't quite capture the beautiful diversity of our religious community. And the faith question, I want to recognize that we have a large Muslim population in Gwinnett County, and I think it's important for us to recognize the needs of that Muslim community. They have often advocated very strongly for Ramadan, for an inclusive calendar, for spaces for prayer, for sacred spaces during Ramadan for them to observe, and I know this wasn't a whole conversation as part of the superintendent search firm process, but it's an important conversation for the superintendent, who I hope they are listening, because they should be. The superintendent should, whoever is interested in working for GCPS, should be watching every single one of our board meetings and understanding who the board members are and what we are looking for, and also understanding the diversity of our community. And this diversity includes a huge Muslim population that is in need for more support, more engagement, and more inclusivity around our calendar, and making sure that their students can appropriately represent. I'm not Muslim, I'm a Jewish person. And I can say that even though this is not something I'm personally connected with, I do believe in doing the right thing, and doing the right thing is making sure that all of our students can have spaces where they feel belonging. And so I do want to highlight that data point that you have in the faith-based point. The other thing I want to say is that across the districts, across languages, across community spaces, the message was clear. People want fairness, they want access, and they want opportunities that are consistent throughout the county. When I attended the District 5 all Spanish language session, I heard from families. They spoke in Spanish, they spoke honestly, they wanted to be represented, they needed to have more supports around multilingual learners, and they also referred to North Gwinnett as having different experiences, different facilities, and there were inequities that were expressed by the District 5 members, which are predominantly schools that are on the At Promise list, and also schools that are Title I. And so all of these schools, I did notice that they expressed a different need. And I want to say that as we talk about the District 5 in particular, in all Title I schools, not just District 5, but we have other schools that are on that governor's list of at-promise schools, that these kids are brilliant. They have potential, they're great, they're smart, they need more supports, they need more investments, and the families express that in the survey, they express it in the groups. When I meet with District 5 constituents, I hear also the need for more support. And the need for someone to courageously address the inequities. So our next superintendent has to be a brave and bold leader. There has to be someone who will unapologetically close the gaps and name inequities without fear. Someone who understands that belonging feels like it is academic achievement. And when children feel valued, Schools are fully resourced. Success is a part of that. So we need a trailblazer, an innovative and courageous leader, a community-centered leader who listens to our families, honors our students, and stands firmly on truth. We also have a school board with exceptional qualifications, broad experience, and a deep commitment to this district. So I want to encourage our community to trust this process, to trust the Alma Group, who has demonstrated professionalism, integrity, intentional engagement at every step of the way. Their authenticity has really created a strong foundation for us to move forward in this process for our superintendent search. So the community has been clear. The Alma Advisory Group has really been an instrumental leader in this process, a trusted partner, and it is our responsibility now to do what we need to do with courage to move forward in selecting the new superintendent as a board. So thank you for the time, and I appreciate all the work you all have done. Thank you for you and your team, and for GCPS school system, who's also helped us in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Dr. Johnson Morgan.
Thank you so much for the report, Ms. Rosen. I do want to, on behalf of Mr. Knudsen, express his delight in receiving the report. I think last week you had the opportunity to speak with him, and he did convey his appreciation for the very comprehensive report out and express that he's looking forward to the ongoing collaboration and the process ahead. He appreciates the expertise that has been demonstrated to date by your team, so thank you. I do want to revisit some slides as I talk through just a few comments. I first want to acknowledge the deep dive that your team embarked upon. You all came and were on site for 2 weeks, I believe. It really became ingrained in our community, and had a chance to speak to people in person, to get to hear their lived experiences. And as you shared, you were able to tease out multiple realities that appear to somewhat be conflicting, but they're people's real and true lived experiences. And so I appreciate your team for being committed to come on site, to spend that amount of time with us, and being flexible, and us realizing that we were missing some feedback from certain groups. And so it was important to launch a virtual meeting. So we appreciate the flexibility of your team and the ongoing thoughtfulness, especially in a way where we're able to tap into groups that we don't often hear from, because it is so important that we hear from as many communities and stakeholders as possible. And the fact that we heard from every cluster in all special entity schools, it means a lot, and it speaks to the integrity and thoughtfulness of this process and the committed approach of your staff. So thank you. If we could take a look at slide 15. Can you just talk us through a little bit? I know you spoke to the shift over the last 10 years and there being 20% of growth that has occurred. Can you speak a little bit to the stats here for those that maybe can't see them? It's maybe difficult to see. Can you speak a little bit to those stats?
Yeah, so obviously this isn't our data, but it felt important to us to really understand this because it came up in so many of our conversations. Everyone talked about the shifting demographics of Gwinnett County, the shifting demographics. And people also talked about the history of going from being a rural school system to becoming a large suburban school district. So we wanted to understand what this was. And honestly, there's so much more we could learn here, but it was important to us to just show the numbers here, that this has been a fast-growing community for years, for decades, and that with huge growth in the last 10 years alone, that this is not a community that sort of hit a peak and then plateau, that you continue to be in a growing trend. And so the graph that's on the left side of this slide is showing the population numbers taken snapshots in 10-year increments from 1970 to 2020. So we're actually almost 6 years, we're almost headed to 2026 here. But it was impressive to us to see you grew by almost 1 million residents in that time span, and nearly 20% of the growth has just been in those last 10 years. So we're seeing only more growth. I want to share that if we had more time, and it could be a great exercise for the district, though they may already have this information, to see how that growth looks by district and by community. Because what we heard from anecdotally from members of the community who spoke with us was a feeling that some schools are feeling overcrowded, or that some schools have had temporary facilities to handle fast growth but haven't yet been able to turn those temporary facilities into permanent facilities. And that's something that many communities are feeling right now. I know you're engaging in a separate process to address that, but it was interesting to us that you've had this growth. We're not sure that's even growth everywhere in Gwinnett County. On the right side is the diversity of Gwinnett County and how that's changed over time. And what you're seeing is, as the community has grown, so has your diversity. And so, we are seeing an increase in just about every aspect that the U.S. Census captures. And I know, there are questions even about whether the last census that was taken is even fully accurate, and that's, around the country, given that the last census came through during COVID. So, it's interesting to be able to see on the right how your community continues to grow in its diversity and what that means for the work of the district as a result of that.
Thank you for that. I will note that between 2000 and between the year 2000 and the year 2020, our Latinx population has doubled. Our Black population has more than doubled, and our Asian population has not quite doubled, but almost, just to speak to the growth there in the diversity. And Gwinnett County is a county that values and appreciates diversity, and that's certainly something that we uplift as a board across our school system and in our community altogether. I wanted to call out the growth of our Latinx population and our Asian populations. Again, the Latinx population doubled over the last 20 years, Asian population almost, but not quite. And if you could go back quickly to slide number 9 for me. If we look at the engagement of our Hispanic population on the survey, we had 11% of respondents were identified as Hispanic. That's whereas correct. About 36% of our school district is Hispanic, identifies as being Hispanic. With the Asian population, 13% of our school district identifies as Asian, but only 6% responded. So to this end of communicating what's important in our next leader, to me, this is a clear alarm for engaging these groups more intentionally, because they are just as important. They care just as much about their children as any of our other subgroups. for whatever reason, they did not engage at the level that we would have liked them to. To me, that represents an opportunity that our next leader needs to lean into to ensure that we're meeting the needs of each and every. And so I wanted to call that out specifically. If we can also jump ahead to slide 16. This slide to me was fascinating because, again, it talks about grappling with multiple truths. And literally, some of these seem to be in contention with one another. So whereas there's a shared pride for our strengths, there's also a desire for change. Whereas some people express wanting to go back to the old way, others have hope for fresh eyes and innovation. In this moment of you presenting, I continue to revisit that slide 15 that shows the change in our demographics. And it helps me to make sense of this a little bit. We've seen great progress and achievement over the years. And some of that, quite a bit of that was with a different population of students. We've experienced a change in the students we're serving, and not just as a result of racial and cultural differences, but it's a different age of students too. And education has to keep up with the ways that students learn, the different varied ways in which students learn. And so I can understand how in the past we've achieved at high levels across many of our schools, especially because most of our students look the same across most of our schools in the past. We had a high population of white students. That has changed, and so again, something that I think is going to be paramount for our next leader to internalize and reconcile is the understanding that we have a diverse body of learners. We have a diverse community of parents that at the end of the day, they want their kids to be safe and they want their kids to learn at high levels. And how to get there might look different depending on the student population. And to your point, I think I heard you elevate this idea of our community wants someone that can gather people and activate people around a shared vision. That vision is one of each and every student achieving at a very high level. How we get there, that's the part where we need a leader to come in and to really strategically think through what individual populations will require. Because not every population or group of learners or communities requires the same thing. There was quite a bit of, if we can go to slide 22, data that you shared that talked about a feeling of things being different from school to school. Mm-hmm. And not even just from the adults, but from the students. Mm-hmm. I think on this slide, there's mention of the disparity between schools. This is coming from a student. Mm-hmm. Some schools are way better than others. Their band did not have uniforms, and they were wearing shorts, and the facilities were not great. And you said something that really struck me, and that there were community members from more affluent environments that expressed the same sentiment. Mm-hmm. So they see it. Mm-hmm. On the reverse, right? On the reverse. It's mm-hmm. not just that those that are on the end of not having the luxuries, it's not just them expressing that I see a difference, but it's those that have more mm-hmm. that are expressing that they see a difference in this group that has less. Mm-hmm. And whether people like to say it or not, whether they like the word or not, that's inequity. That's what it is. It's inequity. And so because we're hearing that from adults, we're hearing it from students, we have to acknowledge that even in this climate, although there are people that don't want to say the word because of maybe the political climate, when the way that the varied truths were described in your meetings, the way that those lived realities and experiences were described, it represents inequity. We have inequity across our schools. So we'll need a leader that is going to be able to speak to that and act to that. It's very important. The last couple of things I want to touch upon is, we had no agenda when we set out, when we worked with your team to set out to gather feedback. We came into this with no expectations of what the feedback would be. But what is reassuring to me and affirming to me is that much of the feedback, how closely it aligns with our board's core beliefs and commitments. We put students at the center of every decision. I appreciate that your team was intentional in reaching out to students and hearing from them directly. And I want them to know and be reassured that the feedback we gather is going to be taken into consideration. We believe that equity benefits all. And so when we have a leader in place that can address some of these inequities that we've heard about that were described, we believe that it's going to benefit the entire school system. We believe that excellence is for everyone. It shouldn't matter where you live, what language you speak, what religion you are, whether or not you're in special education, receive services for special education or not. We believe in excellence for everyone. In our community, the feedback they provided, it communicates that same sentiment and belief. And we believe that collaboration drives our success. This process, I hope, has showed our community how much our board believes in the power of collaboration. We as a board have committed to a process of wanting to really be inclusive and transparent as we seek our next leader. It's not a race. We're not rushing because we understand how important this is. And we don't want to do this to the community, but with the community. And this was our way of engaging the community authentically, and I appreciate the honesty and the feedback that they provided. And I want them to be reassured that our board, and that was the importance of this meeting tonight, being a special called public meeting, we wanted the community to hear the feedback so they can also hold us accountable to knowing what they said, how they feel, what they want to see, and knowing that we're going to take that into consideration as we put together the job posting. So I just appreciate the district staff for the work that they've done to help us to wrap up phase 1. I greatly appreciate the Alma Advisory Group for all that you've done to meet with our constituents, our stakeholders, our families, and to put together the analysis that you shared this evening that was very insightful. And I thank my board, my fellow board members, for the ongoing commitment and dedication to the process. We look forward to embarking on the next steps, which will be putting together that job posting and starting to recruit candidates. Exciting things ahead. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I have a question, Dr. Simmons. Can you share a bit more about the next step in the process, in particular around the questions that we'll be asking of community members based on, the questions we'll be asking of the superintendent process during our interviews, and even looking at the resumes based on community feedback, because there's been, and maybe both of you all can answer this question, because there have been some feedback around how will their voices be really integrated in the questions. We know we have their voices overall in the process around we know we're going to create a profile, a job description. We're going to have all of that based on their feedback. Mm-hmm. And when we go through the process around interviewing and kind of going through the resumes, like how are we going to engage questions that reflect what community voices, what they shared. We will have our questions as a board that we'll agree upon, of course, but aside from our questions, just that's the question that's been asked. I wanted for you all both to answer.
So I'll defer to the details. I'll defer to you for the details, Monica, but I just want to uplift the fact that the process has not yet been finalized. Our board will engage in discussions around what that process will look like in the coming weeks. And so those discussions will entail whether or not, what that process will entail, right? Whether or not it will be simply questions, whether it will entail submission of a performance task. There are a number of options we'll be able to consider that the Alma team will present, and our board will collaborate to decide what's best on how we would like to proceed, but that process has not been finalized to date.
That's right. Very well said, and thank you, Chair Dr. Simmons, for your statements as well. I will say that there are three really important ways that this community input is utilized. Absolutely, the job posting, when that goes out, should reflect everything that the board heard, but also each of you articulated so well the things you're going to be looking for and how you're informed by what you heard this evening and what you hear from your constituents every day. So we expect the posting to really reflect what you heard from your community. In addition, when we do get to the point of deciding the interview questions and activities, what's most important is that it be a competency-based process, which means that your candidates have to demonstrate their ability to carry out the job. Sometimes we look for that in past experience, work experience, and results and outcomes in someone's work. And then other times, as Dr. Simmons just shared, it can be performance-based questions, scenario-based questions. It can be performance tasks. What you will see, though, is that there were many examples brought up by community members that can help you as you're trying to design a process that really does reflect what the job looks like every day. And so that work that Dr. Simmons is speaking to, that's the work we'll do together to really lift up, well, okay, if there is just because I'm looking at the slide, if there is a need for more equitable funding and reducing disparity between schools, how does that show up for our students, for our parents? How does that show up in different communities? Can we give an example that tells a story without having a clear right or wrong answer that our candidates can actually speak to? So those are the kinds of things that we'll be doing as we design the interview activities from here.
Thank you. I have just another question. I'm sorry, but I have to ask this. What is your experience and advice related to, I guess, the final phase? And I know this is a question I have been asked by community members, and I would be remiss not to ask that here in public forum around whether the process is an open process which people deem transparency. So if you could talk a bit about what transparency, quote unquote, looks like in this process, because just because transparency is a word, it doesn't mean that certain things that are personnel in nature are open to the public. And we also want to make sure that we are engaging in a transparent process. So if you can share your experiences around opening up our final candidate pool or our final selection to the community, or have a closed session around that process. Can you kind of just share your experience or whatever your thoughts are?
I appreciate this question. Thank you so much for asking it. One of the things that boards grapple with a lot is how do you sustain transparency while you're doing your job of governing? So we have to be transparent about the fact that there are aspects of your work that will be in closed session, and that's established by policy and by law, and there's certain things you all have to work out among yourselves as you're making your decision, because the decision does rest with you. And you do have choices which districts make as a board about, are there aspects of the search that will be public or confidential? So it's a common practice for many districts to maintain a confidential search process. A confidential search process or closed process means that only your last candidate is the one that gets introduced and announced publicly. It doesn't mean that community cannot engage prior to that individual being announced, but it means that anyone involved as an interviewer is protecting and agreeing formally to protect the confidentiality of any candidate. Confidential processes, like here's the bottom line, right? People have their livelihoods, they have their careers, they have their professions, and anyone who's going to be a top contender for this role is in a high-profile leadership role, most likely today. So how they engage with their community, especially if they're not looking for a job and we convince them to apply, right? It's really important to leaders to be able to protect when and how they tell their communities if they're considering a role for a district like Gwinnett County Public Schools. So because of that, many boards choose a closed or confidential process. And then there are boards who will choose a process where they announce finalists. So most individuals, unless it's mandated by your state, which some states do require that applicant names are provided publicly, especially those governed under sunshine laws. But many states will allow the board to keep the process confidential until they deem fit. And many boards will choose to introduce their top 2 to 3 finalists to their community, to open them up for community to be involved in a more public way in that process. In Alma searches, we have done both. The more public-facing process can be really big. We've had districts where we had actually 8 or 9 panels, like Madison, Wisconsin, where we had 8 or 9 panels of teachers and principals, parents, students, who each get their opportunity to interview the candidates, and we even live streamed 2 of those interviews. And so it can be pretty intensive for the candidates, and it's very public. It could be off-putting to some candidates, so that's a little bit of the give and take is between how are you protecting your candidates, how are you maximizing the number of people who will apply for the role, versus allowing the board to be able to see how the candidates are interacting with your communities. So those are some of the choices that will be before you as a board. Now, those are the examples around, the range of how candidates are introduced throughout the process.
And what are the risks of if we have it open or versus closed?
Yeah. So, there are candidates who will say, I cannot participate and take a risk of my information being out there if I'm one of three, right, candidates. Some people want a little bit more assurance that they're a top contender before they let it be known in their current organization that they're leaving. This tends to be a bigger sensitivity for sitting superintendents. Individuals who are more, whether they're chief academic officers, deputy superintendents, tend to be less sensitive to this, but many candidates prefer confidentiality. We know because we talked to all candidates about this. Many would prefer confidentiality for obvious reasons, but candidates also understand this is a common practice. So we, as your search firm, can be asking candidates for that as we go. Yeah. I think the other side of it is, sometimes there's more scrutiny, more public critique of the board if the process isn't more public. So if you choose closed, you might have more candidates, but then you might have a lot more scrutiny or a sense from your community that you haven't been as transparent as they had hoped for you to be. So, and we've seen both of those things occur. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that context. Again, it lends toward us being transparent in our upcoming processes and what the board will need to consider as we decide on what that will look like for GCPS. So I appreciate you sharing that with our community and for our board to begin thinking about.
Yes, and I think it's very helpful for you as you make those decisions to let the community know what the decision is. It shouldn't be a surprise to people. And there are, no matter what, even in a largely public process, there are still going to be things the board has to handle in closed session. And so the best you can do as a board is to be clear with your community about what those things will be. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I shared earlier with the group is that when you inform your community, that cultivates an environment of continuous engagement and trust. And we're saying one of our core beliefs is collaboration. And so it is very important to us that you, Monica, continue to inform and update us so that we can also inform and update our community. So thank you. With that being said, I would like to ask if there is there any other discussion that we need to have? Or if not, I need a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I have a motion by Dr. Therese. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion is seconded by Ms. Stone. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. It is unanimous. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.